In a shared office setting, there are plenty of things to be suspicious of, like the office refrigerator. Is this even food? Was it ever? Oh no. This is worse than the Chinese food from last month. Don't do it, Linda. Oh, Linda did it. Recognizing suspicious malware in your office technology isn't always as easy as smelling a carton of funky stir-fry.
Mach 2. Solve your plant floor mysteries and challenges with integration of your equipment to your business systems. Even the simplest of machine cycle signal paired with context from your business system can automate manual processes, provide precise data and execution, and deliver data to business systems while providing dashboards to allow for real-time decisions. Mach 2's rich, out-of-the-box delivery, combined with a code-free, powerful SCADA toolset, allows for rapid deployments to address short-term needs and long-term continuous improvement and scaling. Mach 2. Take control of your plant floor.
Move forward faster with network solutions from Comcast Business that can help you pivot easier with remote collaboration tools. Work safer with managed cybersecurity. Connect faster with bandwidth flexibility and software-defined control. And stay agile to scale up, scale down, adapt to change, and bounce forward.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us in the IoT-Enabled Predictive Maintenance on the Factory Floor session here at Integr8 2020. This session runs till 2:20 p.m., and I'm Greg Orloff, your moderator. Just to clarify, I'm not a member of the Automation Alley team. I'm a senior analyst in CBDO at IoT World. So in terms of myself, I have a background in engineering as well as business, and have held several executive positions in high-tech and low-tech sectors for small organizations as well as Fortune 500s at both for-profit and not-for-profit, and have successfully led several startups as well. I have a passion for innovation, technology, and people. And for those of you that are not familiar with my organization, IoT World is a digital publication. We're focused on the industrial side of the IoT sector, the Internet of Things. We've built a global community of over 200,000 decision makers who are predominantly at the executive to C-suite level. And our goal is to connect the smarts, which is simply how do you help the cutting edge technologies and products and services reach the CXO decision makers who seek them. We do this through a multi-channeled approach. In areas that are relevant to industrial IoT, our focuses are ranked among the top influencers globally. Agnostic thought leadership content that is relevant to our community is always accepted free of charge. And if you're interested in growing awareness, we do offer demand generation programs to do that as well. So in terms of today's session, I'm joined here by three panelists, and we'll give you a short bio and overview of themselves before we jump into an interactive dialogue on the topic at hand. So the intent for this session is to very much be interactive. So please do submit questions and comments into the chat window here. I see some of you are already participating, so thank you. So I thought I'd kick off with just a couple relevant facts. According to McKinsey, 8.4 billion devices are now connected globally, worldwide. There's over 700 IoT platforms in existence to date. And according to Topio Networks, they just did a market study, and their predictions are for the industrial anomaly detection sector. They're targeting this to be $2 to $3 billion global market in the coming 5 to 10 years. As well as the predictive maintenance, they're also targeting that to be $2 to $3 billion. That's with a B, global market. So the topic of today is very salient to an expanding global need. So while you're pondering those statistics, please allow me to introduce Frank LaPlante. He's the Vice President of Digital Transformation at Wesco Distribution. Frank, the floor is yours.
Thanks, pleasure to be here. And I get to do an actual very fun part of this, not that the other is not going to be fun, but Wesco, and then recently Wesco just completed an integration with Anixter. And for those who don't know, Wesco is about a 100-year-old industrial distribution company. Wesco stands for Westinghouse originally, primarily communications, electrical and utility and broadband, with a heavy emphasis on selling to industrial end customers, factory floor, OEM, et cetera. Anixter, very strong global presence, very strong on the IT end customer side. So bringing us together, what's relevant, we thought, for today's call is when we started to actually talk with the Anixter team, because Wesco was on our own mission of trying to figure out the IoT commercially strategy of how we could help customers in the OEM industrial space. They were on an almost identical path running down the IT end customer space. When we got together, we realized that we were hearing the exact same things, seeing the exact same trends, and most importantly, the same barriers to this becoming an inflection point that's going to accelerate rapidly. So what we thought we'd do today is we've recently conducted a lot of internal and external surveys at industrial end customers, every different type of industry, every different type of application, with the primary intention of we're past the point where people are questioning whether or not this is going to be a thing or whether this is going to accelerate. It is, we know that. The stat about how many devices are going to be connected and the benefits of remote monitoring and asset management, that's already out there. The question is, why is this not accelerating at the pace that everyone was anticipating it was going to? So we really went out with an open mind. And by the way, as a global distributor, we are not beholden to any technology, any supplier, or any product. We can literally provide any type of service, solution, or technology. So this genuinely was what's happening at the factory floor all the way up to an executive level with our industrial end customers about how they're viewing digital transformation, IoT, whatever they want to call it. So real quickly, what we thought we'd do is spend 5 minutes just talking about some of the common themes we heard back. I'd say a good portion of these are not going to be a surprise to anybody, but I would also say that there's going to be some surprising elements that we found out, and I'm sure that you guys are seeing and hearing as well, regardless of what you're doing in this entire ecosystem. So clearly, we're at an inflection point. That's what we're hearing more and more. Clearly, COVID has accelerated digital in more ways than anyone could have predicted, specifically about knocking down traditional barriers to accelerating digital transformation journeys. What do I mean by that? Two of the biggest traditional barriers to any type of wholesale digital transformation efforts were cybersecurity and lack of ROI. Well, with COVID, interestingly enough, people needed to almost backburner those, still very, very critical, obviously, but almost we need to find a way to be able to conduct our business open more remotely, with more automation, with more remote monitoring, with more predictive analytics, while doing so with cybersecurity and all the other elements. So that's the backdrop. So a couple of things that are not going to be surprising. So in reaching out to our customer base, this is the, again, industrial factory floor, OEM, utility customer base. We didn't go in and ask them specifically about digital transformation. I'll explain why. We went up to just talk about what are the things that they're most interested in hearing about or need the most help on. And I'm just going to fly through these. First off is what type of service solution are most important to you right now? First and foremost, believe it or not, was engineering contracts such as OEM support and field service. Next was supply chain management, such as storeroom management and repair. Third, remote support contracts such as phone, online, machine monitoring, etc. And then surprisingly, a distant fifth was cybersecurity monitoring contract, which is interesting. And by the way, if it appears that I'm talking out both sides of my mouth with some of these questions, that's kind of the point. And let's move on with that. Another question we asked them is, what are your top concerns as they relate to productivity? We're talking about factory floors, environments. Number one, reliabilities such as equipment uptime, having the resources to be proactive. The second was aged equipment, which came up in a lot of different themes, a lot of different ways. And third was network disruptions. Again, you could argue that all of these fall into a single category, but it was all about, I've got a lot of old equipment from a lot of different manufacturers out there. I need to be able to not only know when they're going to go bad, but why they're going to go bad. And I need to be able to ensure uptime, whatever uptime means. Next, what type of training, meaning of all the things that your employees, you would like them to get trained on, what are the most important things? By and large, number one was PLC and motion. Number two was drives. Interestingly, safety is becoming a really big focus right now, especially with COVID and the ability to distance and be able to make sure that people are wearing PPE. Moving on to the next one, and that there's only two more questions. What types of engagements? Again, without leading the witness, we were asking, like, how would you like Wesco to help you with your journey, whatever that is? The number one by far was modernization services and legacy technology replacement, meaning we've got all of this stuff in our floor, in our buildings right now that we know is old, we know is not connected. How do we make this jump from our legacy system to the new world? And then number two was comprehensive support contract services to meet needs. And then very low on the list, believe it or not, was Industry 4.0, Factory of the Future, road mapping. So here's where I think the funny thing comes in, and I'd love to hear the other panelists' thoughts on this. At the end of the day, here's the specific question. Does your company have digital transformation or Industry 4.0 or smart factory or IoT? We listed every potential name that they could possibly. Do you have a strategy for this or a group focused on that? The number one, actually, I'm going to, I don't want to steal my own thunder. Yes, we have a team that exists that is focused on the strategy, 30% of all respondents. Next, yes, but we need some assistance, only 7%. Maybe, but I am not involved, and that was 11%. No, but I would like to get involved, another 11%. 40% of the respondents, the number one response is, no, I've never heard of it. So what does that mean? On one hand, you heard all the responses talking about predictive maintenance, uptime, productivity, remote monitoring, all the things. Yet when you ask them about what their digital transformation or IoT strategy is, they're not making the connection. So the point is, what we heard over and over again is from all of these customers at all levels within the organization is, I don't know where to start. I need someone to come and help me with my journey. I need help promoting this solution or this ROI up through my organization. And I need just a single voice or a partner to come in and tell me what's what. So that's all we really had. Again, nothing surprising other than on one hand, everyone is saying specifically what they need. But when you ask them yeah, but what do you want to do for digital transformation? There is, I don't know what that is. So clearly there's an opportunity here for all of us to band together, more of an education, thought leadership, talking about not just the individual components that we can all provide, but how this all ties together holistically, because that's what customers want. A single evolutionary solution or recommendation based on their entire digital needs that they could view and look at as a holistic solution. So with that, I'm going to sit back and be available at the end for any questions you have, and I'll turn it back over to our moderator.
No, appreciate it, Frank. That was a very insightful survey. So there were a lot of details. I think we can dive into those. Maybe I'll just do a real quick introduction or allow the rest of the folks to introduce themselves, and then we can start to peel that onion back and just have a chat. So our next panelist is Mr. John Rosowski. He is the CTO of Machine Q, which is a Comcast company. So John, please welcome, and if you want to say a couple words.
I'd love to, Greg. Thank you so much. I think what I'll do, if that's okay, is I'll trail on to some of the points that Frank kind of laid out there nicely. A little softball action for me, Frank. Thank you. So one of the things that we're finding is as people are kind of catapulted into the space where they really do have to solve many of these complex business problems, we're finding a couple different things. Many of them don't, simply don't carry the expertise in some of the underlying, platform infrastructure components that are required to kind of deliver on these solutions in a timely manner. It's just not their charter. So what we're finding is people are looking to people like you're seeing on this panel to be those experts, help them stay abreast of, cutting edge, technology and innovation that could more economically and rapidly solve their problems. A lot of what we're seeing in the space are folks on so many, very far sides of the bookshelf, right? Folks on one end that are merely trying to solve and automate for, typical business environmental type problems, all the way through to the other side of the bookshelf where we're being asked to, build and provide and support solutions for kind of advanced, preventive maintenance, asset tracking. And frankly, everything in between. A lot of the conversations that we end up having are people who, are working in a very fixed space, almost a kind of a dated space where they don't understand that the tool set that they have to work with has evolved so much over the past 3, 4, 5, plus years. We have customers who are looking to build upon their relationship with Comcast, right? So Machine Q, while we are the enterprise IoT arm of the company, as many of you hopefully know, very strong, foundational business that we have providing connectivity to a lot of these folks. So many of them, knocking on our door, asking us to help them, better understand what their options are, and we're happy to be there for our customers. Very kind of multi-dimensional relationship that we're able to now start to form with them. So what we're finding is people are approaching us saying, hey, I have distribution center floor, I have or distribution center or other types of business. I'm exploring wireless connectivity X. We come to the table and say, hey, so instead of deploying those, or in addition to those 100 Wi-Fi access points for 2.4 gigahertz coverage, we say, hey, how about something that might be a little bit more simplified for you to deploy, say 2 machine queue gateways, right? So we go down this path with them and help them understand that with a lesser investment, more pervasive coverage, we can help them really achieve the coverage that they're looking for, which ultimately, Greg, was to enable machines to talk to machines so they can do things like monitor the temperature of them. Is this machine breaking down, detect vibration, providing an efficient, large scale, high performance system that allows them to ultimately extract all the data from these inanimate objects that they need to keep their businesses running and healthy. So we're finding that that there's so many of these conversations that are happening, people not really understanding and recognizing that there are brand new forms of wireless communications that are at their fingertips, and frankly we're happy to be there for them. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, and we'll go from there.
No, thanks, John. Some very insightful comments there too. So our third panelist, Mr. Mike Cerno, is the CEO of Defiant Networks. Mike, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Mike Cerno. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Defiant Networks here. So got a background coming from IT side, former software integration engineering. Ended up pivoting into IT security, somehow kind of stumbled into OT security, had no idea what it was, fell in love with it, and ended up kind of building my hill on it. So spent a lot of time bridging IT and OT in many different places while trying to draw upon understandings of the different dichotomies there. So I do have bio on the Pathable page here, but to kind of delve a little bit into Defiant Networks here. So at Defiant Networks, it's a technology firm that develops robust and scalable solutions to secure the realm of what I call the cyber-physical system integration and security space. So we've identified 2 pillars of Industry 4.0, cybersecurity and integrations, and these proliferate throughout the rest of the 7, right? Or people say 7s, people say 8s, people say 9. Without those 2, we've realized that growing that will be very hard to do in a safe way. So we've built our hill on securing the communications that happen between that. We do that by building out protocols and solutions and implementations that really cloak or make invisible all of your devices, whether you're doing this on LAN, on WAN, LTE, private LTE, whatever kind of connectivity you have going from A to B. So really just building our hill on securing the communications between anything that has a physical impact. So, yeah, that's it for me though. Thanks, Greg.
No, I appreciate it. Appreciate it, Mike. So we're here to talk about the shop floor, right? We're talking about predictive maintenance, preventive maintenance, getting at that data that is in existence out there on the plant floor. So maybe we start there. I think you hit on a point, Frank, I wanted to come back to in terms of the acceptance and the willingness of organizations to jump in. If I interpreted your survey right, there's a lot of, if you don't lead them into it, there's a ton of projects out there, maybe potential case studies for organizations to do. But as soon as you throw out the vernacular of digital transformation, everybody locks up and freezes up and doesn't know what to say. What are you seeing? I'll throw this to each one of you in terms of willingness to adopt, whether it's from a budget standpoint to tackle maybe that first program or that first project in organizations. Are you seeing uptake? Are you seeing our groups do that?
Yeah, I'll go first because it's very interesting just from a macro perspective is getting customers to agree to proof of something out. That's not a problem. And by the way, when you do it and you're successful and you can show them the ROI, like prove the ROI, you've got a champion within that particular branch or factory, get all the way up the chain where the people who are actually writing the checks and creating the budgets, for some reason, there's a disconnect. So where I see the issue is not that people don't want to try to deploy these in their own facilities. It's once they do, how do they speak the language of the finance department or the IT department to be able to get them to understand what the actual commercial or financial benefits are going to be? And so that's where usually things peter out. So unless you go into it, which is a big ask, but unless you go into it with almost like a promise back from the end customer that, look, we're willing to do this for this factory floor. And if it does what we think it's going to do, we need your commitment that we can help scale this throughout. Because otherwise you can run yourself ragged doing pilot after pilot after pilot and still not see the scale that you need.
What do you guys see in terms of technology? I know I hate this saying, there's more than one way to skin a cat, but you can go in and just when you take energy or you take a utility or even a manufacturing environment. Are you seeing an embracement of go in and gut it and just replace everything with digital input output? Or are you seeing folks that want to do kind of a bridge gap to where you got a device that's digitalizing analog equipment? Any insight there as to how folks are addressing it?
Greg, this is John. One of the things I can comment there. I mean, before my time at Machine Q, I spent many years as part of kind of Comcast proper building one of the world's largest broadband networks, right? So they're for many of these companies that are even smaller than Comcast's, bigger than Machine Q, they rip and replace is not an option. Incrementalism really has to be part of this story, right? Because rip and replace to many of these folks represents disruption to their business, right? To go back to Frank's point, also, he made a few minutes ago, the kind of the budgeting process, that kind of talking the talk is from a finance point of view is substantial. One of the things that we've seen to really kind of resonate kind of the message around what people should be exploring as far as new technologies is they can get the party started. For example, when they're talking with us with the swipe of a credit card, right? So not only does it work with lots of large organizations because that they help. That's easy for people to understand. It fits on a credit card transaction. It's also fit for a lot of groups that are outside of the audience of this, including places like municipalities, right? But the biggest point that we end up making to folks is, with a modest investment, minimal disruption, you can get the party started. And that is in contrast to a lot of things that they're already being faced with. Like, I have to deploy 100 of, these type of devices. It's going to take me 9 months, several $1 million. We come to the table, I think that the objective of this crew here is to come to the table and say, with a modest incremental investment, deploying a couple devices, sensors that have, that last 10 years on a battery, like that starts to resonate not only with kind of the people on the technical side, but also the people who are writing those checks, right?
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. Go ahead, please, Mike.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to add too. So working with the municipalities that I have in the past, rip and replace is obviously not a thing to do. And so going to John's point of incrementalizing those changes, I mean, for sure, it's, looking at it kind of from a 30,000 feet above in the air view. The conversations I've always been a part of are basically making sure that you have the system that you're going to in place and then incrementing those changes over. And then there's different factors in determining the ROI that you get from that. But I think really as long as you've got a firm grasp of how your organization and your facility is meeting certain requirements on the automation stack, you should be able to pull in the metrics to gauge your OEE properly and turn that into a number. But yeah.
Greg, Ian's kind of reading our mind. Yeah, I see it here. He's well, thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying the panel so far. He's a co-founder of a startup, Can.do-it, I think is it, and it's in the electrical engineering and IoT space. It says they're having a hard time getting large customers to come on board. So a lot of them have old school Windows Server Modbus equipment that they paid a lot for, and they don't want to lose it. It sounds like, and doesn't necessarily work that well for them. So how can they convince? This goes back to that age-old ROI that you hit on, I think, Frank. How do you convince them that a newer technology is worth the investment? How do you demonstrate that ROI?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this. Again, I think going back to John's point, I don't know that the right approach should be to recommend any type of forklift upgrade. And I always like to go to a consumer example. Let's say there's a really top of the line, connected refrigerator or stove that's available on the market that gives you incremental benefits and features, like it can reorder milk for you, versus finding a relatively cheap sensor or software you can stick on your existing refrigerator to pull out that information. So what we're seeing right now in early days is there doesn't seem to be, nor should there be necessarily, a big appetite to do any type of mass overhaul, because all of the information, legacy or not, no matter how old, is spitting off some type of data. Really, what we're seeing is, how do you harness that data? How do you aggregate that data? Do something with it? So my advice would be, take what you have. Your devices are talking. You're just not able to listen to them effectively. And that's why, we are seeing over and over again, if you approach this just from a sensor perspective or a gateway perspective or a cybersecurity perspective, and then and you're doing those individually, you're missing, we think, the bigger picture. So the more, if you can look at this holistically, and someone can kind of come in and tell you how to take advantage of your existing assets and investment and how you can start the journey, you can do so in a very thoughtful way that doesn't involve a lot of capital expense or a lot of risk, quite frankly, and learn from it. You can learn from that journey. This shouldn't be no one's going to deploy a digital transformation effort in their factory, unless, I don't know anyone who would. So everyone just needs to get that first step. And I think John said that as well. Make it iterative, go in and show them how to collect the data, store that data, analyze that data, most importantly, use that data to make decisions.
Greg, one of the things that it's almost like, Frank, we rehearsed this, but we didn't. The thing I'll tell you is that the data is gold, right? It is the currency today. If there's any mistake about it, I can tell you that from our perspective, in just over 13 months, we've seen 500% growth in data payload traffic through our platform, for example. That's staggering, right? So it just goes, it's a proof point to show, to go back to Frank's comment about, like, it's all about the data. What we're finding though is people, Modbus, RS-232, and I'm not ashamed to drop either of those here on this webinar. One of the challenges that we find ourselves being confronted with is being the problem solvers that enable our customers to gain access to that data that's coursing through those systems that are all basically disconnected. One of the things that we've often said to people, and tried to be as respectful as possible, we're trying to connect smart, like, so you have a lot of machines that are independently smart, but because they're disconnected, they're almost like, dumbified, right? Because you can't get the data out, right? So one of the things that we're trying to do is kind of help liberate that, get them access to this data, whether it's building, some sort of a bridge that allows for the extraction of data from Modbus over in the machine platform or RS-232 or what have you. We've even done it, frankly, with Bluetooth, right? We're finding new ways to kind of allow people to, garner and extract valuable data using Bluetooth as kind of the last step media. Lot of power there. Enormous amount of power there.
So I want to latch on to something that, and this is going to take us in a slightly different direction, but we're throwing out Bluetooth. We're talking about, anything from personal area networks to local area networks, wide area networks, LAN, WAN, all the acronyms galore. How do you see 5G fitting into this from an industrial perspective? Do you see it coming into, do you see resistance to it? Do you see embracement of it? Maybe if you guys can share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll hop in here because I've actually been having these conversations quite recently with integrators and service providers about 5G. I think 5G being used in some kind of private LTE setup, I think that does solve some problems high level. But one thing I've always been personally, had some reservations about is proliferating 4G, LTE, eventually 5G throughout your facility. And that just has to do with, from the security aspect, being versed in the different protocol stacks and where some of the inherent insecurities are, and then making that, in charge of consuming your IO for processes that you know need to stay running, you know, your business necessary. I think operationally it'll work good. I just think that some concessions need to be made. You need to start looking at you can just Google this. Google anything like fake cell site stations, fake base stations, and see how that affects cellular power devices in the vicinity. So yeah, and I'll stop there because I need to let these guys go.
Greg, from our perspective, you know, we're all about the right hammer for the right nail. You know, 5G today is a conversation. We're not overly kind of inundated by it. You know, a few years ago, NB-IoT, but there's been a whole host over the years, right? And every nail you can use a different hammer for every nail. So from our perspective, it's not we don't carry a religion over any one over the other. Our platform today, as you heard, you know, me kind of sprinkle in a little bit. We may be LoRaWAN first, but as you heard us say, we have BLE support as well. Our position is we're going to do whatever it takes to make sure that we're solving the problems for our customers. I think, Greg, briefly, you'll find that there are nuances to all these options. There's power consumption, there's cost, there's a number of other things. Mike mentioned a couple from a security perspective. So really goes back to my very first comment on this topic. It's also about the right hammer for the right nail, right?
Anything to add, Frank?
No, I think they captured it perfectly. I really do. Is that what frustrates a lot of everyone involved in this market right now is people are dying out for, hey, what solution should I buy? And that's pretty comical. We're in a stage right now, there is no solution. Every single customer and every single environment, every single application is different. These are going to be bespoke, customized solutions, and that's okay. That's okay, because what the industry is crying out for, the best we can tell, is somebody to kind of just help boil this all down to me, tell me everything that I need to know and do, like I said, from sensor all the way up to cloud, help me put together some type of business plan or ROI model for that. So that's really what we're hearing, right? It's less technology and more about just, we need someone to come in and help us start this journey.
So I guess if fundamentally, when you look at something like predictive maintenance or prescriptive maintenance, as it's evolving, you're talking about machine monitoring, you're talking about sensors. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. So communications network aside, I mean, where are you seeing issues around cybersecurity from potential vulnerabilities at the sensor level? And if you take like the Purdue model and you go down to that 0 to 1 level, not that many people are looking at that. What's your perspectives on that?
Yeah, so getting things onto layer 0 devices is very difficult because, for one, they don't support, most of these things don't support kind of shoehorning and extra technology in there. So you're looking at layer 1 and 2, that's really where I think effort should be looked at. Now, not that layer 0 is important, it's that you've got to understand that there's going to be kind of a certain lack of capabilities, right? Unless new products get churned out that support that. But right now, we have lots of legacy things that are running in many different facilities, manufacturing cores. So I'd say making sure that if you're following the Purdue model properly, you should be observing segmentation at each layer. Segmentation gives you power in that security of obscurity type model. However, I've seen some scenarios where it's like, hey, we've employed the Purdue model, but it's really a flat network that kind of makes your head spin. And I think really just defining better what that looks like is good. For my own fallback, I always think automation stack, Purdue model, and then NIST, I think it's 800-82. For industry-specific standards, and if you're ICS or OT network, then do couple that with also pulling from IEC 62443, which is a cybersecurity standard guideline for setting up a secure OT network. it's nuanced, it's complicated. I would say do what you can, concentrate on level 1 and up, and then as more products come out, your actuators, sensors, thermometers, whatever, what have you, that have these security capabilities in there, then you can start, welcoming those into the security fold. But do what you can now, and don't try and reinvent the wheel too much.
What do you gentlemen think about, and you brought this up earlier, I think it was you, Frank, or maybe you, John, the cultural issue of this. You hear time and time again, I know we hear it where we operate, information technology versus operational technology versus just IoT in general. And there's this cultural chasm or void between the two parties. How do you bridge that? I mean, how do you truly bridge that? I know that it's probably a rhetorical question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, maybe examples on where you've seen it working very well in some of the organizations that you work with. Because I know from my experience and what we've gleaned as well, if you attack it from a holistic IT mindset, then you're going to get pushback from the engineers and the operators on the tech floor and the engineering staff there. So I'll leave it at that. What have you seen that's working out there to bridge that culture or embrace that cultural chasm?
I mean, Greg, we find that, and this isn't always something that we control, but there is the inventors, the creators, and then there's the operators, right? Having bled, operationally for many years in a good way, right? I mean, I've learned, I am who I am today because of many of those years operating. So as a result, we appreciate the value in including those folks in the process, right? At some point, you have to get past the idea phase, right? And it really has to be about including all the necessary stakeholders, including those who have operational accountability at your customer, at your customer company, right? Giving them a seat at the table, helping them understand the value. There is fear, right? In many cases, right? The interesting thing about COVID, if I could say, there's a handful of silver linings about it. It's really pushed a lot of people to do things differently because they don't have a choice now, right? You can't send 10 people into a store to go do what they did before. You can only send 2 now, right? So what those 2 people are doing is really important and has to be the thing that they're generating revenue around. So now there's a lot more openness around the other, IoT around the other 8, right? The other 8 things, right?
Yeah, I would add, I think that's very well put. I would say the areas by far we've had the most success is what we, inelegantly call voice of customer, where because of our relationship with a single entity at an end customer, we're actually able to secure a meeting with that person and individuals within the same organization that they probably don't talk to. So finance, IT, operations, even an executive is possible. So getting individuals that have no reason or cause for getting together and actually facilitate a discussion. Because what we're finding out is IT individuals, and I came up through IT, they're thinking in very, very specific terms. Whereas plant floor or operations or facilities, there is so much domain and tribal knowledge that they have in their own minds that it's very, very difficult for them to actually explain or convey the importance of increased throughput or all of these things that we're talking about. So as a result, their voice doesn't necessarily get heard. So where we've been very successful, and by the way, we'll bring in our integrator partners, we'll bring in, we don't do integration. We'll sell whatever is the best solution, is by going in there and actually acting almost as a mediator between the different groups and showing what, having a facilities or operations person talking about a benefit, we can actually say what that means from a reduction in CapEx or an increase, that is where we've seen by far the most steady acceleration of improvement. Because if that core operations facilities or plant floor, the person is responsible for trying to articulate up the chain why they need to spend $1 million for an unknown ROI, it's never going to get done. So again, bring the people in, bring in an outside consultative type approach without any agenda. That's important, no agenda. And get the different groups in there, because everyone in that group, everyone in that meeting cares about something totally different, all related.
Frank, even if I could add, even bridging gaps between CIOs, the data, and CTOs, the network, right, yep. Has been pretty eye-opening for us. Same company,
with completely everyone having the same, I guess, macro view, if you'd see how divergent each of their priorities are and how the poor operations plant floor managers have been left on an island all this time. And, what happens, by the way, when people start retiring? We talk to customer after customer who can know how his or her plant is running by the sound of the actual machinery. I mean, it's that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Or
How do you
the
explain
hand
that
on the
to an
bench
IT
as you
person?
walk by.
Yep. Right.
Yeah, no, you're right. It doesn't translate, right? Until you walk them out there, and you can't walk them out there if they're doing this. That's the tricky part. I want to poll the audience, not in a formal fashion, but if you folks could, just drop in the chat a real quick, maybe some of the sectors that you're working in, something as simple as medical manufacturing, transportation, anything along those lines. Just start to drop some of these comments in, and then I'm gonna throw Jamie's question out to the group here as well. It says, since 5G is not prevalent yet in the private network space due to current limitations in the CBRS band and unlicensed bands, what's the best first step for a wireless network option, assuming a carrier network is not desirable due to cost?
Greg, John here. I think it depends on what you're looking for, right? I think you have to first define what problem you're trying to solve. Are you trying to solve for ease of installation, better propagation, low cost, low TCO, right? Deploying a mobile network in any form or fashion these days, whether it's, licensed or unlicensed, you're gonna have to buy base stations, have backhaul connectivity, et cetera, right? It's a conversation we're often a part of, right? And we help, like for example, just to use the Comcast headquarters in Philadelphia, 3,500 access points provide, high-speed Wi-Fi to several thousand people in a 60-story building. 16 machine queue gateways provide, kind of the analog, IoT connectivity plus a quarter mile around the building, right? So like you get two bookends, right? But like, CBRS fits in there, probably a broader use case. It really all depends on what problem you're trying to solve, right?
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Pick the right hammer. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so kind of riding on the coattails a bit there. It depends what it is, but if I'm not mistaken here, I think the reply was oil and gas industry. So if I'm thinking oil and gas industry, the first thing I think of is having well pads and remote sites, right? And having to collect all that data, aggregate it or collect it, send it upstream. And the way that we see that normally done is over 4G LTE connections, because they are typically in geographical disparate locations. And so you're sending all this data to systems that can consume it, like they're sending it to their remote SCADA so that they can feed that, and that ends up feeding their MESs and ERPs and all that. So that's the way I see it so far. It really is just, law of the tool, like John said. So
Mike, question for you, if Greg doesn't throw something at me for being disruptive here. So
Yeah,
what are your thoughts on that scenario for oil and gas? I just noticed in the chat, so I do apologize to the person who asked the question. What do we do when the oil and gas facility is in the middle of the ocean, right? Have you been confronted with that? We've dabbled in it a little bit, and perhaps others in the audience have. But in that case in particular, we've seen even LTE be challenged for folks in that space.
Yeah, and it would come down, I guess, for me, it would come down to a number of things. How far are you from a provider tower could be one thing, right? 4G is nice because it's a different area of the electromagnetic spectrum that you're transmitting from, that you're utilizing for it, but it allows you to go a little bit wider, even though it's a tiny bit slower. Whereas in 5G, you've got to have everything close together, but it's wicked fast. That's a good question. I hope that what they're running out on these oil platforms out in the ocean, getting constant, consuming constant IO from things could be difficult. I can see that. I've dealt mainly with things on land, so that's actually pretty interesting business case there. So I would actually kind of like to hear more about that. Could be here, could be offline, but it's for my own edification at least.
Well, it goes to that point, right? If it's even you take an example, and thank you for sharing, Jamie. We're happy to make a case study out of it if you want to give us more information on the fly here. But it's, the oil and gas sector could be a refinery side of it too, right? There's a lot of different levels we could be looking at. You can have a rig out remotely, it could be an oil patch up in Canada, it could be anywhere. Maybe to that point, if give us some examples, from your experience. I mean, where have you seen, rapid IoT adoption, and deployment? Where are you seeing these predictive maintenance success stories? If you can just give us one, you don't have to give us names, but just maybe an example of company X doing Y type of business.
I could offer you two, Greg, briefly.
Sure, go for it.
Two that come to mind, just for starters, no particular order. Well, two categories, right? Leveraging LPWAN for the tracking of assets in multiple forms. We have a very large customer who does a large volume of automotive asset tracking, right? So a couple machine queue gateways and literally thousands of endpoints that are being tracked. Amazing use case. More granularly speaking, folks in kind of the laboratory space where they're using kind of a concatenation of both our LPWAN platform with BLE to track high value assets. You think more like in a laboratory setting, all the way through to theme parks. So Comcast proper knows a thing or two about theme parks. So again, same wireless, far-reaching, high propagation infrastructure. We partnered with a sensor manufacturer that can help with sensors that can provide the data for predictive maintenance. So think about being on a theme park ride and now knowing that you've got all the requisite data flowing out on a regular automated basis to help make sure that this theme park ride is even being better being maintained. You're detecting vibration, heat, this, that, and the other thing. So a very wide range of scenarios there. And there's a lot in between, right?
Good example. I can only imagine that Disney and Universal and all those players are doing the exact same thing. I mean, it's always fascinating to me when you look at this concept of asset tracking, even in an environment like COVID. A lot of it's being done at a human resource. You're tracking people, right? You're trying to connect those dots, but that technology is transferable to other applications that people aren't even probably considering yet. So definitely an interesting. Once again, thank you for sharing that example. Mike, Frank, anything you'd like to add to that, or you see any case studies from your perspective you'd like to share?
Hey, Mike, go ahead if you've got any.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't have any specific home-hitting examples, more so my experience is working with the people that enable that to happen. So it's nice when I get to talk to people that are just they're like, hey, we're able to fit, these vibration sensors and whatnot onto all these different legacy devices so that we can pull the OE properly and give the customer that capability to, determine and craft their own ROI. So not a success story specifically in that realm, but I do hear stories like that, which is really nice to hear, because it means we're onboarding people in Industry 4.0 and digital transformation. We're bringing on participants. So hopefully trying to lower those margins of what Frank had led with earlier, which is some really good examples and really good data. So.
And I'll just give one, which is kind of a fun example, but you can multiply this across every single industry. And this literally just happened past month. One of our existing industrial customers, and I'm going to screw up the name of what the actual application is, but a metal extruder. So they actually run lines of metal like that for automobiles, and there's different grades of metal, which I wasn't aware of depending on what type of car. And when we went in and spoke to someone who was a friend but not necessarily a believer in AI or machine learning, our suggestion was, with integrator partners, hey, why don't we just slap on some sensors, analyze some data, and be able to come back and tell you if we think we see some optimization possibilities here. And this individual said specifically, there's nothing that computers can tell me that I don't know myself. And really what it came down to, without really having any existing problems that they knew about, as it turns out, there is a very specific optimal cut on a metal line of when one production run starts and one the other. And it's a big difference. If you cut wrong, you're bleeding into a different type of metal and it's bad, so you have to throw out the production. So their plus or minus historical optimal cut was plus or minus 19, 20 feet. We went in and said, let us run some data. Let us go back over the years. Let's analyze your data and let's see if we can come up with what a true optimized cut would be. This individual said, no, I'm not going to give you any of my historical data, or I'm not going to tell you what the cuts were. I'm going to give you years and years of data. You come back and tell me where you think over the past 3 years the optimal cut would have been. So he wasn't even going to play with us. We came analyzed 3 years of this data. We were actually able to not only achieve almost 100% accuracy on premium cuts, we reduced the optimal cut down to within 2 feet. So then what does that mean? We went back and looked at all of the runs they did for the entire year, and we're still formulating what the ROI is, but they had a waste and scrap issue that they didn't know about that we're now estimating is in the millions of dollars just by being able to go back, run a history of data and say, hey, we can condense it down from 20 feet down to 2 feet, thereby saving you X amount of metal. Again, I don't know what it's measured in, but that's something that this person went from cynic to skeptical to resistant to how do I deploy this in every other facility now? That's the success story that we just have to keep as a community getting out there. Because again, machines and factories and buildings are talking. We just have to find a way to listen and do something with that data.
Hey, Greg.
I love that thing. Yeah.
I got one more for you, if you don't mind. It's
Sure.
probably worth noting.
Yeah.
So on the heels of temperature. So I've been in this business for 25 plus years. Over the years, done business with every walk of life in high tech, right? West Coast, global, whatever. I never thought so many people cared about temperature in my life and humidity. But I cared about it when I complained about suburban, Philly being hot and humid. But there's a whole new world of people caring about being able to automate the acquisition of temperature and humidity. We have a customer, and particularly important during COVID times, where they need to be able to kind of take temperature and humidity for kind of consumable related matters like food, right? Huge wins in this space, being able to automate the collection of that data, making kind of critical daily business decisions, especially when you're limited in the number of people that can be in a store at any point in time, right? So going back to the very, very beginning of this conversation, I used to have 10 employees in a place working, right? Now I can only have 2. Well, I still have to take the temperature of the food in the cold case. So do I have this person making sandwiches or taking temperature? Which one, right? Well, you got to go towards the one where you're making money, right? You're generating revenue, right? Everybody's still trying to run a business here. So, just to add to the pile of use cases that we're seeing, pragmatically speaking.
No, that's fascinating, and it's not putting an IR thermal on a food cart, right? You don't want that guy running through the facility making sandwiches. So that's definitely a good example. Thank you, John. We were coming down, and we've got time for a couple more questions. How about, can you share any? I always call these, toe stubbing avoidances. In an effort to try and help and enable some of the smaller, the medium-sized companies get out there and do exactly what we just talked through. How do you do that proof of concept case study where you go from that dashing skeptic to this, wholehearted endorsement of embracing technology? Any things that you've seen in organizations' journeys that you could share that would prevent some of those pains early on in companies that are embarking on that digital transformation you can share?
I just go back to what I said earlier, and I apologize if it sounds simplistic, but it really was simple as leveraging the relationships we had and them doing us a favor by basically scheduling a meeting with some of their counterparts in different businesses and going in and asking them high-level questions, what corporate initiatives they have. And they're all the same, reduce energy, reduce cost, increase throughput. So once you have that discussion, and then you start saying, what are you guys doing to, better automate your business? So just by doing that, what we're finding out that triggers so many different good, positive flags and gets the discussion going. And unless you're doing that, unless you can tie a specific business need down to what we're talking about, it's a hard road. So ask the customers. That's what our strategy is going to be. And frankly, we're at a point right now where we're not able to have enough of these as we want because they're very in depth and you have to go in there almost as a consultant listen to what they're doing, and then come back and make basic recommendations. But ask the customer, bring as many people from the different groups as you can, and that's the best solution.
Perfect.
Greg, I think my only adder there is going to be, I'll just say it, fail fast, right? You got to try something early. We see a lot of companies kind of get stuck, especially, of the kind of larger, kind of existing companies. They get caught in like analysis process. They go through this, especially as the dollar amounts go up, like they have to be very kind of rigorous as far as their assessment. But one of the areas where we've been able to really help, we felt like we've been able to help fuel people's kind of journey is giving them kind of low cost efforts to basically give it a try, right? Fail fast. And honestly, in some cases, we're the right solution for them. In some cases, we're not. I think it's better for everybody to learn that sooner rather than later, right? And now once the data starts to flow end to end, like the possibilities, like the synapse just start firing like all over the place, right? So when there's a fit.
I agree.
Yeah, I guess what I would add to that too is make it so if you're like SMB or small medium organization trying to kind of participate in Industry 4.0 and you have all this litany of services and tools and bells and whistles that you can implement. I think it's really about properly managing those expectations. So there's lots of bits and pieces to it. I think coming from this more pragmatic approach, it's really kind of do a gap analysis as soon as you can. Take what you would need to get these automation solutions done. Measure that right against what you have now. Find out the gaps and where you have to fill those in. And then, just short and long-term implications of that too. So how long does it take to implement those? Are you having to reinvent too many wheels to do that, et cetera? It really just, this reminds me of a Dave Chappelle piece that he did where he says, sometimes people stand too close to the elephant. They don't know they're looking at an elephant. You've got to take many, many steps back to see the whole picture. And you need to have that objective view if you're going to properly manage those expectations. And so it's really just gauging the amount of effort you have to do to meet that. And that's, it's probably not the whole equation, but I think it's something one of the few things to lead with when doing that. So.
I think those are great points, though. I mean, it kind of goes back to that fear of failure, and that it gets harder and harder as economic investment goes higher and higher. But I love the way that you put it. It was fail fast, fail often, and fail forward. But don't forget to fail. And that sounds counterintuitive, but you're not going to make any progress unless you start changing something and tweaking it. So, a great insight. Maybe as a last thought here, I know there's a lot of effort out now in terms of digital twins. Any perspective on that, or where you've seen that being leveraged, in a predictive maintenance perspective? I'll just leave it at that. Anybody have any thoughts on digital twin or success stories or even failure stories, if you will?
Not that I could explain in 2 minutes. That's
Stay tuned for the next session.
Yeah, next session, definitely. It's a big topic.
Yeah, I see that from high level looking down, kind of very useful in the simulation stages. So being able to sandbox out different scenarios with different multivariant things you're introducing and whatnot. It's in predictive analytics, I think it's called the Markov chain Monte Carlo model, which is where you've got a core data set, and you're just adding things to it, different things, and seeing how those kind of tree out and play out. And I see one avenue of utilizing digital twin is kind of for that. But then again, there's other use cases that's kind of sort of outside my purview, but I do like to read articles in it when I can. So. Yeah.
Very good. Any thoughts on that, John, or we'll leave it at that?
I have none. I'm on that topic. I think I'll have to pass. Thank you, though.
No, I appreciate it. Well, I think I'd love to thank Innovate for a fantastic conference, and John, Mike, Frank, it's been spectacular. I think you guys have created some tremendous insights into your respective worlds and how organizations can leverage technology on the plant floor from a predictive maintenance standpoint. So thank you, and thank you for joining us today, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right, you too.